thank you for joining the fun here at All for Animals. We're a growing podcast, so be sure to find us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at All for Animals Pod or our Instagram at All for Animals Podcast. Thanks so much. We'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode, Pet People. This is All for Animals with your host, Peter.
And your host, Rachel.
And I guess I already said this is All for Animals, so do you want to do it?
Yeah, let's go for it.
And this is All for
Animals. Perfect.
Okay. So we've got a fun little episode for everybody today. We are discussing our favorite childhood animal movies.
Woohoo!
And there is a bit of an age difference between Rachel and I, so I think that we're gonna touch, multiple generations of
that just hurt my soul.
Movies.
Did you just try to say I'm a different
that.
generation?
We're bordering. I'm looking at mine, and I've got a movie that's I think over 20 years old, and then a movie as new as I think 10 years. So There's a decade margin with mine. Okay, do you know what the year of your oldest movie is?
All of my movies came out in either 92 or 93.
Okay.
And so I'm going to dispel this whole myth that I'm a different generation, because I'm only 32 and you just turned 24?
Yes.
Yes. So there's only 8 years difference between us.
This is true. Yeah.
Don't make me out to be your grandma.
90. So my oldest movie on my list is Finding Nemo.
Okay. Wow.
I think was that 99?
Was it 99? I thought it was in the 2000s.
It might be. And then my other movies are 2006 and 2004. So
okay. Wow.
So there's about a 15-year difference between our movies. So we'll be covering
Finding Nemo is 2003.
2003.
Yes.
Well, and how old was I? So I was 4 in 2003.
Oh my God.
So that probably, but I know it's not much of an age gap when you say 8 years out loud, but then you think about what I missed in your time, it can be a little different, especially with how quickly animation kind of came to be. And like if you watch, the older movies with the older special effects and all that stuff, it is really night and day to some of the animation we have.
Oh, absolutely. But you're never going to be able to convince me that everything from current day is better than everything from, my generation, as you like to say.
No. Yeah, I agree. They don't make movies like they used to.
No.
So, well, I guess let's dive in since I already gave away my first. It's obviously Finding Nemo.
Woohoo!
Which I think is a fan favorite of most people.
Oh yeah.
I like so much of that movie. The animation's cool.
Mm-hmm. The scenery's beautiful.
Exactly. Of course, the character development and the storyline. That movie is, what it is and why it's popular for a reason. I think Finding Nemo is just such a goofy,
endearing,
heartfelt movie.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And that kind of goes back to they just don't make movies like they used to. I think like in the wonderful world of like iPhones and social media, movies are kind of a secondary kind of electronic entertainment.
I think you're right. I've definitely noticed that I have so much less interest in movies that come out nowadays. It's just kind of like it's either a recycled plot line that I've already seen done better a million times, or it's just something I'm not interested in.
Right. Well, and that's why I included some new-ish movies, just because there are some along the way that are really, really good, but Finding Nemo is just one of those movies you can watch a million times, and it's just as good as the first. And I think they did really, really well with the Finding Dory movie. I think that was a really, really good movie. And how they kind of kept the storyline kind of intertwined with the original Finding Nemo was super cool. Now, I'm going to give you guys my favorite scene from the movie. And if you do feel like writing us an email and describing your favorite scene for Finding Nemo, do that at any time.
Oh, yes, please.
I like his treacherous escape through the fish tank in the fish filter.
The dentist's fish tank?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep, exactly. When he's escaping and they're making their big escape.
Yes.
Through the filter, and he almost gets chopped up. And
like, heart in your throat moments.
Well, and it's funny because even though I've seen the movie 100 million times, you still get that, like, that like tense moment.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Preaching to the choir, because I'm about to tell you how I bawled at rewatching all of mine.
Now, what was your first favorite childhood movie?
Okay, so I don't know if I should like do these in any specific order, because trying to pick like an absolute favorite would be something out of Sophie's Choice, which I'm now realizing you're probably too much of a youngin' to know what I'm talking about.
I'm going to say never heard of that. Never heard of it.
Oh, geez. Okay, so it would be like trying to choose between my children. Let's see. I'm just going to go ahead and jump into the one that I just watched last night, and that was Free Willy. So we're still in the ocean.
Right.
And please tell me you have seen Free Willy.
Of course I've seen Free Willy.
Good.
It's been a long time.
Well, and to be honest, it had been quite some time since I saw it last, which was why I felt the need to give myself a little bit of a refresher before we talked about it. So I just loved how it shows how transformative the bonds between humans and their animal companions can be. So it starts off with, you know, this troubled kid with no parents looking out for him. His name is Jesse, and he gets like caught tagging the very tiny and insufficient orca tank at this adventure marine park thing. And he's, you know, he's assigned to clean that up as his quote unquote probation. And a couple who lives right near the little park, they decide to foster him and try and take care of him. And so he finds out that the orca that's being housed in that terrible little tank his name is Willy. Spoiler alert, it's in the movie title. Right. So he's not getting along well with people. He's a troubled case, and I guess through that Jesse and Willy bond, and Jesse is able to teach Willy tricks and gain his trust, and nobody else can get Willy to cooperate at all because he just doesn't like him. And it's really hard for me to pick like one singular scene that means the most to me, because honestly so much of the movie just had me so sad, especially knowing how unfortunately Keiko, the whale that played Willy, died shortly after the movie.
Right.
I don't know. Do you know the whole story about that?
I don't know the whole story, but I do know what you just mentioned, that he did pass away like right after the movie was made.
It was actually 10 years after the first Free Willy was made.
Uh-huh.
There was this huge push to address his piss poor living conditions, which is always, that's a great thing, because he was living in like an overly chlorinated and too warm tank. He had a condition, like I don't know if I could call it like a skin condition, but around his pectoral fins. He had a bad immune system. He was not healthy in those conditions, and so a few different organizations kind of rallied, and there was a bunch of money put together to try and re-release him out into the wild where he was originally caught. And so over the course of about 3 years, it looks like, he was slowly reintroduced to the wild. And I mean, from the get-go, it wasn't going very well. Like, they kept testing to see if he was able to find his own food when he was doing his like practice dives out in open water and everything, and he wasn't. He was afraid of the other whales and all of that stuff, and eventually he never was able to integrate with the pod that they placed him with, and he contracted pneumonia and died in 2003.
Wow.
It's really, really sad. And
right.
I mean, part of me was really upset about the whole movie, and I'm sure there's going to be people that are upset that I'm talking about it on a public forum like it's a great thing. But in my opinion, I think it actually is, because it shed such a huge light on the problem of these orcas kept in captivity. So there were already so many whales being kept in like the SeaWorld type attractions and everything. And without the movie Free Willy, I'm not sure if we would have made the progress that we've made today in their welfare.
Right. Well, and I think that's the thing is like sometimes those sad endings can have a silver lining of that happy ending of now we kind of have that push of knowledge and education and awareness.
Yeah.
You know, around keeping larger animals like that in captivity. Well, it's just like how everyone loves The Wizard of Oz, and like everyone that was in that movie was treated horribly throughout the show. You know, so, and, you know, I mean, that's how change kind of occurs is unfortunately humans are kinetic learners. And so I think you're exactly right with, you know, that the creation of that movie sparked a lot of tension and kind of rebranded how we look at these animals and how we look at how they should be kept in captivity.
Absolutely.
So, and way to follow my theme with starting with the water movies, the ocean movie. It works out well.
Absolutely. Okay, so what's your next movie?
We are keeping the under the water theme. I think this movie's honestly kind of slept on. It's like that movie that DreamWorks Flushed Away that's on Netflix right now. It's a great movie.
Oh, I love that movie.
Do you? I love that movie too.
Yes.
This one's kind of relatable. It's called Shark Tale.
Oh, the one with Will Smith.
Ever heard of? Yes, it's the Will Smith movie. He is the voice of Oscar.
Yes.
I don't know who voices the shark Lenny, but I really, really like the plot in the movie of like a kind of insecure vegetarian shark. I think that's a really, really funny setup for a movie.
Yeah.
And how he's here. Like the first scene of the movie is someone casts the line with the worm on it, and then Lenny goes and frees the worm because he has a heart and he feels bad for it.
So I'm about to have to mock you a little bit for not knowing who plays Lenny.
Who is it?
It's Jack Black.
Is it Jack Black? Okay,
yes.
I thought it was, but I didn't want to be wrong. So, okay, I thought it was Jack Black, yeah. And I don't think him and Will Smith have done a lot of work together, which makes this movie even more nostalgic, right? So
yeah, now that you mention it, I don't think they have worked together.
I don't think they've had it. Yeah, I don't. Outside of that, I can't think of anything.
Okay.
And I really like the plot in the movie, as mentioned before. I really, really like the animation.
Mm-hmm.
Like the two jellyfish and like how just the art behind that, how they were made. Do you know who I'm talking about? Like the two. Yeah.
So what is it about the animation in Shark Tale that speaks to you the most?
It's really warm. It's really whimsical. It's like my style of art with like just like the brighter colors and kind of the way, like obviously when you're making a cartoon, right, the main lead that he falls in love with, you have to make her look elegant. And I like the way that they can take a fish and, you know, depending on their character, make them appear as elegant to, you know, the other characters in the movie.
Sure.
I also really like how they created the whale wash. That was super cool. How like the whales are
car wash.
yeah. How the whales are like they're like the news billboards almost for the little world they live in, and how, you know, his father was a janitor for the longest time, and, you know, everything works out the end with him owning the car wash, and, you know, Lenny's father accepting him for how he is and wanting to be a vegetarian shark. Yeah, it's just a really, really I think it's a really put together movie.
I think it sends a great message with that whole storyline with Lenny the shark and getting his family's acceptance and everything.
Right. The kind of like, well, that was I think that was the internal struggle that both Lenny and Oscar had, was they like wanted to be a certain way. Yeah. And they weren't okay with it.
Yeah.
Like they wanted to be okay with who they were, but they weren't. And I really like Oscar's character development too. How he goes from, you know, Oscar the shark slayer and living this lie, to realizing what's really important, and that's not, all this fame and boasting and
yeah,
all that good stuff. It's more of staying true to yourself, which Lenny, I will say, did a better job throughout the movie. His character, kind of stayed more consistent in who he was. He just wasn't as confident in who he was, whereas Oscar was kind of just looking for 5 seconds of fame, which I think is kind of something that I see a lot nowadays with social media.
Like all the influencers and stuff like that.
It's hard to stay true to yourself sometimes.
Yeah.
And, keep you're allowed to have your opinion and keep it to yourself and just things like that. And I don't know. I think that it was just a really, really good setup for Cisco. Hold on. Quit making noise. It was just a really, really good setup for an inspirational movie. And like I said, I feel like it's kind of an underappreciated movie as far as just, how current it was in its time and how we don't really view it as one of those super nostalgic movies.
Sure.
But in my head, I do. That was the movie we would watch, when we had our little family minivan with the 2 really small TVs for traveling. That
you
was
had one of those?
We did. At one point, we did. It was me. I'm the youngest of 4. So to keep all of us from fighting while traveling, it just made sense.
Oh, man. So my brother and I dreamed of having those little doohickeys in our cars on our road trips.
At first we just had the ones you would set in your lap, if you remember those with the little disc DVD player.
Yeah.
And then Mom and Dad had upgraded to the Honda Odyssey, I think it was, maybe. Minivan with the handy dandy 10-inch TV that folds down. So yeah, that also, not the movie itself, but just the experiences, the point in my life of when I would watch it is kind of what makes it all that much more nostalgic.
Sure.
And again, there's just so much to like about that movie, from the animation to the character development to just the plot itself.
Yeah.
And it's also really funny. So if you're an adult and you have children, you know that those movies are made by adults, and there are some of those those subliminal messages that just go right over a kid's. And there were so many rewatching all 3 of these movies. I was sitting there that definitely went right over my head when I was 10. So,
I had that same thing happening over and over again when I was rewatching as well. I was like, oh man, I totally missed that.
Well, and it's it's a Will Smith, Jack Black movie. It's just going to have a lot of those jokes in it, and of course,
it's going to have some
that's another reason. Right, absolutely. Well, that's another reason I'm biased to the movie, is I really like Jack Black and I really like Will Smith. So anything they create, I'm going to have some sort of bias to it. Jack Black's hilarious to me.
Sure. I mean, you can't argue that cast is amazing. So I Googled it, and there's Will Smith as Oscar, there's Robert De Niro, there's Renee Zellweger, Angelina Jolie, Jack Black, Martin Scorsese, Ziggy Marley. I mean, so many names in here.
And it's crazy to me that there are so many big, Bob Marley's son was in it. And I just feel like it didn't get some of the attention that it should have. It's obviously a well-known movie, but I would think it'd be a little bit more well-known. And I like the vibes. I like the background music of it. It's kind of that Island Paradise kind of just kick back, have fun vibe to it. Yeah, it's just a really fun movie. If you haven't seen Shark Tale, be sure to check it out. I rented it on YouTube. I believe it was $3.99. You can find just about any movie you want for rent on YouTube, and it auto syncs immediately. You're able to watch it. I think you have it for 7 days, maybe. Don't quote me on that.
Cool.
But and there may be some other places where you can find it, but YouTube tends to be my go-to. Now, Rachel, what is your next movie?
Okay, so this one I know for a fact you haven't seen. And shame on you, but it is probably the most nostalgic movie I could ever talk about, and that would be Fern Gully. And I know I've mentioned it on the show before.
Mm-hmm.
So Fern Gully, it was released in 1992, so I was only a year old, and it is.
I wasn't.
You weren't even born yet.
I wasn't even a thought in my parents' head at that point in time.
But it's such a beautiful movie, and I have it on DVD, and you can find it on like Tubi and Freevee or whatever those like free streaming services are.
And it'd be on YouTube
I'm
too.
Sure it's on YouTube. So you need to check it out. Like you, Peter, and you, our audience, you all need to check it out because I promise it's worth it. So the main character is technically these little like fairy tree spirits, but then I mean, in my opinion, the one who steals the show is, as always, Robin Williams' character Batty, who is just, oh my god, he's hilarious and he's weird and goofy and sarcastic and witty, and then he's had all of these like experiments performed on him at a biology lab, so he's got like a wire sticking out of one ear, and throughout the movie, if he says something that one of the little spirits doesn't agree with, they'll like flick the wire or something to get him to quote unquote change channels and stuff. So it's really funny. And so there's Robin Williams playing Batty, and then there's Tim Curry, who plays the bad guy in this movie, Hexus, who is essentially like the force of evil or destruction. And then there's also two amazing actors that I was not aware were in it until I was rewatching and was looking up the credits. Cheech and Chong are in Fern Gully. You know who Cheech and Chong are, right?
If Cheech and Chong are there, it's a great movie. Everyone knows Cheech and Chong. Everyone knows Cheech and Chong.
Just making sure, especially since we're both major stoners. I was like, you have to know who they are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yep.
So they have small characters, but as soon as I knew that I was looking for their voices, I was like, oh, yep, that's definitely them. And I was just so stoked that they were in there. Just added another level to my glee. But
yeah.
The scenery is beautiful. Like all of the backdrop is like that gorgeous, lush watercolor and pastel. And it's set in like the Australian rainforest. So it's just like dense vines and flowers and adorable animals absolutely everywhere. And it's also, now don't hate on this because I know a lot of people aren't a big fan of musicals, and this isn't I wouldn't necessarily call it a musical, but there are a couple of musical numbers in it, and oh man, are they hilarious and catchy. And I mean, the opening song to this movie is literally my jam. So when I'm like waking up in the morning and trying to not hate the world for having sunshine because I want to go back to bed, I have a morning jams playlist that I'll play on my Alexa all throughout the house. And that's like the first song that pops up every morning is that opening song from Fern Gully. It speaks to my soul.
So it sounds like there's a little bit of nostalgia attached to this movie.
So much nostalgia. Yeah. Literally all of them. It's so much nostalgia.
The nostalgia. Oh, absolutely. And perhaps maybe one day we can do like our favorite animal movies that, are more recent, rather than childhood, like polar opposite movies we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
Newer releases. And we can even do another one of these simply because 3 movies is
there's
just
so
not
many
enough.
I think this could easily be a series too.
Yeah, I was sifting through quite a bit, and I narrowed it down to my 3 just based off like overall
yeah,
why I like these movies and why these movies stand out.
Yeah,
but there are so many more that kind of are really comparable that just didn't make it into this episode.
So one of my favorite things about this movie is it's all like an ode to saving our environment and more specifically our rainforests and everything. So at one point, the little, like the main little fairy, Krista, she asks the one human that's like all throughout the movie, can't you feel its pain when he tries to like cut into a tree? He's like carving her name into a tree and he can't feel the pain. But I just loved that, like, I guess, is it imagery or metaphor, something
symbolism.
Like that. Yeah, symbolism. There we go. Yes. I just love that symbolism of, Krista takes her hand away from the tree and it's glowing red and she's like wincing. She actually physically feels pain from touching this wound on the tree. And it's just a beautiful way of remembering that, it's a tree. Yes, it doesn't necessarily have like a sentient like knowledge base or anything, but it's still a living creature, and it's also just important for us and our survival and everything. So it's important to look out for it. And I actually I remember being so scared to hurt the plants and flowers around me as a kid, thinking that they were going to feel pain. And I like bawled my eyes out at one point because I had plucked a dandelion out of the ground, and then I realized I had to have heard it, and I was inconsolable. It was it was a very deeply meaningful movie for me, and then when I realized that I was hurting this little dandelion by pulling it out, I couldn't forgive myself. And so, I mean, it does come with some emotional trauma, I guess, but in an endearing way.
Right, absolutely. I think that's kind of how a Robin Williams movie is. No matter like who he's like, he was a character, right? So
oh yes,
any movie, either created by him or that he stars in kind of has that really sincere and adult kind of message to it, whether it's a kid's movie or not.
That authenticity, the bittersweet.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Exactly. Yep.
So one of my favorite quotes, and I say this all the time, I usually reserve it for the grumpy old dogs with like one tooth left, but they're still trying to gnaw your face off. So at one point, there's a human that like gets shrunk down to the size of like a mouse, basically. And he sees Batty, who's gigantic to him now, and he draws his pocket knife, and he's scared of the bat, but Batty is terrified of him. So Batty's like wrapping himself up in his wings, and he's got one of his little little bat fingers out, and he says, "I have but one claw, but beware." And it's just so cute because he's terrified and he only has this one little like thumb claw thing, but he's like, "I'll defend myself with it." And it just makes me think so much of those grumpy old dudes, the pups that they hardly have any teeth left, but they're, man, are they gonna fight you for everything.
Yeah, or even one of my sassy 1 pound hedgehogs.
Yes. Yes. And I
Right.
wanted to leave it too with the ending of the movie. It has like this beautiful, almost like cave painting of handprints going across the screen, and then it has a quote that just says, "For our children and our children's children." So I love the message of this isn't only for us, it's for all the people to come after us as well. Right. So it's just such a beautiful message.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great one to mention. And, additionally, all back to that, Robin Williams, just, he was one of those guys that's really a shame because he could speak to anyone. He could pull anyone's strings. You know what I mean? I think that he could really connect with just about anyone through his movies.
He was so fearlessly authentic that he could relate to anyone.
And consistent. And I think that's the thing that makes him so relatable is like, the message that he would put out through his work was super versatile yet consistent, which is just a really rare find. So
it really is.
Now, my last movie, I think, is the ultimate underdog on my list. It's a movie called Ant Bully.
Okay.
It's another animation movie. Have you seen Ant Bully?
So I'm pretty sure I saw it at one point when I was maybe in like those tween years or something. So well after it came out. But I'm not sure if I really remember much of the plot. So I guess you'll have to educate me on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into it. So the reason I picked this movie was mainly character development.
Okay.
So the main character, Lucas, he was being picked on by his peer group.
Oh.
And in turn, I really like the beginning message of the movie, which is kind of like this hurt people kind of thing, because I think that's something that everyone needs to note in the back of their mind. If you meet an asshole in public day to day, no one, you choose to act that way, but people that don't carry around that kind of energy typically haven't been through.
There's more to the story.
Exactly. So it's kind of this notion of hurt people, which I think really needs to speak to younger kids that don't understand maybe why someone behaves in such a bitter manner.
Sure.
And in turn, because Lucas is getting bullied by his peer group, he starts, bullying the ants and flooding their ant hills and all this. It's kind of a retaliation for the negative feelings that he feels by, being picked on. And my favorite quote in this movie is something to the effect of, "What are you going to do about it? Because I'm big and you're small."
Ooh, yeah, that strikes a chord.
And that was that's what the antagonist bully would say to Lucas, and then what Lucas would then repeat to the ants. And he had signed on for an exterminator to come and eradicate all of the ants on their property, which also, obviously it's a kid's movie, but it just was funny to me. I'm like, why is this little 8-year-old boy signing a contract for an exterminator to come out? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And anyway, so the plot kind of picks up, and the ants then have their retaliation in creating a potion remedy that would come into a human's bloodstream, would shrink them down to the size of an ant, and that's what they did with Lucas. And they snuck into his house and poured a drop down his ear, and he woke up, the size of an ant.
So kind of a pick on someone your own size.
Exactly. So that was kind of like karma.
Yeah.
And then he learns the way of the ants and kind of starts to empathize with them and realize, just because I'm being bullied doesn't mean I need to be a bully. And then starts to work with the ants, and then further confesses that prior to being shrunk to the size of an ant, and learning their ways and their struggles and all that he had sent the exterminator to come out next week. And so, then it's this mission of trying to get the exterminator canceled, but he's the size of an ant. And there's this really fun scene where he's like jumping back and forth from the telephone, trying to call the exterminator and listen to what he's saying, and then run to the other side of the phone and communicate. And the entire time, I believe it was a pizza. He was on a pizza restaurant, and he thought he had canceled the exterminator, and it ended up showing up anyway. And, of course, Lucas goes and saves the day. And I'm blanking on how he became the size of an ant, or he grew back to outside of the size of an ant, back to his normal Lucas size. I think it was a reverse remedy that they had constructed. And after that point, the bullies had came back to him, and he stood up to the bully, and the bully's posse, per usual, turned on the main, how there's like that ringleader where he walks first and then his minions stand behind him kind of thing. And all of his minions had taken Lucas's side. And so it was just a nice little happy ending. And I also want to reference, if you guys do decide to watch this movie, when Lucas he's set to stay at his grandma's house. And his grandma is like seen as like this kooky old lady that just seems, like off of it and unaware. Sure. And how she's talking about how Lucas was the size of an ant. Because it's funny how the grandma knew what was going on the entire time. And then when reiterates it to the mom, she was just like, yeah, whatever, Grandma. I don't know what you're talking about. So that was just like a little funny insert into the film, was the grandma. I just liked her character.
All of the animated grandmas, they are amazing.
Yeah. Like the one in Robots, I think, is my favorite animated grandma, if you've ever seen that. Another movie that I just didn't think it got the time of day it deserved.
For Robots?
For the movie Robots, yeah. I really like the grandma in it.
I like that movie as well. It's been a long time since I've seen it, so I'm having trouble remembering the grandma. But, I love Moana for the grandma.
Sure.
And then, Grandmother Willow from Pocahontas. She's so sassy. I love her. I love a good sassy, Disney-fied grandma. And I know Absolutely. That Aunt Bully is not Disney, but, in the same vein.
Yeah. Right. Well, and it all goes back to, I just really like the character development and the internal struggle.
Yeah.
In that movie, and of course the resolution to the ending of the movie was wonderful. And that wraps it up for me. So what's your final movie?
So my last favorite movie from my childhood is Homeward Bound. And please tell me you've seen this one.
I have not.
No! Oh my God. You missed out on childhood, my friend. So, Homeward Bound is the story of a blended family with 3 children, and each of the children has their own respective, like, I'm going to go with like that soul pet, the one that's really important to you specifically. And
right.
They have to move temporarily to a small apartment that's kind of far away. So the family makes arrangements for the 3 pets, which is an American bulldog named Chance, who is played by Michael J. Fox, so fantastic there. A golden retriever, Shadow, and a Himalayan cat named Sassy, who's played by Sally Field, so also gold mine. They are going to stay at like a family friend's farm for while the family is staying in that small apartment for the dad's work. And the animals obviously have no way of knowing that this whole arrangement is supposed to be temporary. So after like a really short period of time at the family friend's house or farm, they all panic and run away in search of the family. And the whole adventure takes them through the thick of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And so it always just shattered my heart knowing that they thought they had been just coldly abandoned, and it wasn't the case at all. And I'm also going to go ahead and blame this movie for my constant narrating of all of my animals' thoughts, because the witty banter between all of the pets it's too perfect. And if you haven't seen it, you desperately need to. It's on HBO, I believe. No, not HBO. It's on Disney Plus. And so, like, Chance is just like, he's the American bulldog. He's like the picture of the overly hyper, goofy, lovable dummy. And so he's like always getting them into trouble. And Shadow is the loving, guiding, like wise old like grandfather type. And then there's Sassy, who's the bratty, sarcastic, witty, spoiled little sister. And the bond between each of the children and their respective pet is just so heartfelt and sweet. And I always felt most connected, I think, to Shadow, probably because he was, the old soul, the gentle, loving, almost like parent type character. And he reminded me so much of my first dog, Woody, who was a Sheltie Collie mix. And I had him until right before my 18th birthday. And he was just the most loving and sweet dog. And he had that like old dog energy, like that old dog vibe his whole life. So I think that was what made me like kind of almost over identify with Shadow and his relationship to his boy, whose name is Peter.
Great name.
Yeah. So, like, I think they also just do an amazing job in this movie of showing the world from a nervous, inexperienced animal's perspective. Because, I mean, like you were saying earlier, you feel the dang emotions of these poor animals. You are sucked in. And, I mean, I've seen the movie a million times. I know how it ends. And yet I was bawling my eyeballs out because I felt so sad and scared for these animals who had no idea that their family was still loving them and still worried about them and hadn't abandoned them. And, they're seeing all of these terrifying things. They're running into really scary and dangerous situations and animals all along the way. And it's very, I don't even know how to describe it except for make sure you have tissues.
Yeah, it sounds similar to that movie Bolt with Miley Cyrus.
It is similar, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I like that comparison because I also love that movie.
Yeah, well, it was just like the way you were talking about that movie. I was like, that sounds a lot like Bullet with like, you know, they think that he gets thrown out like trash and the whole time mom's looking for him and he's out in the world and, you know, meets up with the kitty with no claws. And it's a really sad movie too.
It is sad, but also sweet because, you know, it does end very nicely.
But, right, yeah. We always love a good happy ending, don't we?
Yes. Well, and see, like, I love Homeward Bound as well because it's a great way to remind people just how terrifying the world can be to our animal companions, and that even when we're trying to help them, they don't necessarily understand that. So, like, there's a scene where Chance gets he gets quills from a porcupine stuck in his lip, and there's an animal shelter vet who's trying to remove those quills and treat the wounds, and he doesn't know that that's what they're trying to do. He just knows that it hurts and they're holding him down, and he panics and runs away because of it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just such a poignant scene, especially for, you know, what you and I do and what vets do and everybody, where it's like, we know that we're trying to do what's best for that animal that's in our care, but the poor thing could be thinking that they're on the way to die, and we have no way of like effectively communicating that to them, you know. And so it always makes me sad that there isn't like an English to dog dictionary to be able to explain.
Right.
So I'm also just gonna ask that our listeners do me a giant favor. I'm going to need you to give all of your critters, every single one of them, some extra lovin's for me, because I just got way too emotional rewatching this movie, and I need to know that everybody's getting extra snuggles.
Absolutely, and I'll do the same as well, Rachel.
Good.
And I think that if any of our listeners want to give some feedback about this episode today, and if you have another movie that you think that we should watch and do an episode about, or if you liked the concept of this episode and want us to discuss some of our additional favorite
animal movies,
or just animal movies in general, right?
Yeah.
Feel free to write us in anytime. We'd love to hear your feedback, and I'm hoping that you guys enjoyed today's episode as much as Rachel and I did.
It was a lot of fun, and I have to say, as far as homework goes, rewatching some of my favorite movies from my childhood.
That's some easy homework.
Oh, yeah.
Easy homework.
Definitely.
Awesome.
So thanks for joining us today, everybody, and send us your suggestions, your feedback, whatever have you, to allforanimalspodcast@gmail.com, and make sure to like and follow us on Facebook. We are All for Animals Pod, and check us out and follow us on Instagram, All for Animals Podcast. We'd love to see you.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and until next time.